So something that I missed out in the previous video by a commenter and follower of my channel, as Honey Badger says, the fact that employers want to reduce their labour costs does not mean they can reduce them. That's exactly right, because at the end of the day, you may want to do something, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're able to do something. Wanting to do something is entirely different from being able to do it.
Capitalists are always trying to save on labor costs because they can make a better profit if they do that. But here comes the contradiction. If all capitalists are reducing the number of workers they pay or reducing the pay they give to their workers, what will result is that the working people have less and less money. And if they have less and less money, they can't buy what the capitalists are producing to sell.
He also rightly pointed out that the reduction of labour costs results in the higher productivity, more production value, and therefore costs of goods and services drive down, and therefore there's more money in people's pockets to buy more goods and services, which destroys Dr. Richard Wolff's argument. The other point that Honey Badger was right to address is that competition will always step in and offer service to those who have been made redundant, resulting in more labour.
Every capitalist is always trying to either make more money or survive competitively by saving on his labor costs. One capitalist does it by substituting machines for working people, automating, getting a computer to do what he used to have 50 people do, etc., etc.
The automation argument is another one, and you can go back to Henry Hazlitt's excellent book, Economics in One Lesson, where he addresses upon this argument. And that even during the Industrial Revolution, what was found was they blamed the vast unemployment on the automation. Rather, it was the invention of these machines that actually created thousands of more jobs rather than less. Again, as Honey Badger rightly points out, so Wolff and Marx are simply wrong when they say that the pursuit of higher profit and lower costs is the death knell of capitalism. It's in fact the engine. I mean, this is a very, of course, strong argument by Honey Badger, and I do thank himself for having made that, statement, and I always welcome people to put in their own input. I think it's just as valuable to have the comments within a video rather than just my own word. So let's take a look at Dr. Richard Wolff's continued argument against capitalism.
It papers it over. For example, when people couldn't buy in the 1970s, the capitalist system kept going anyway. How did it do that? How did it keep going when the people didn't have enough money from their wages to buy? The solution was credit. We loaded the world up. House credit, that's your mortgage. Car payment credit, nobody buys a car except by paying out. Credit cards, which didn't exist before the 1970s for anything but traveling businessmen, and only a small number of them. And then when that was not enough, we loaded up, for the first time in American history, an entire generation of students who can't get a degree without loading up with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. We kept the system going. People could buy stuff even though their wages didn't pay for it by borrowing. And in 2008, the predictable happened. It turned out your fix only lasts for a while. You really have to ask, in a way that many of us as Marxists haven't done for most of our lives. The problems of capitalism now are so severe, so systemic, so global, that we're beginning to wonder whether this system is going to find a way out. The Marxists are not the only ones wondering whether this system is coming to an end. The people on the other side of the political fence are very worried too.
What Dr. Richard Wolff doesn't touch upon is the fact that the cheap credit that was being issued out was issued out with the artificially driven down low interest rate. As I mentioned before, under capitalism, interest rates are set freely in the marketplace via the laws of supply and demand, not by a set group of people sitting in a central banking system controlling and manipulating interest rates through a socialist price fix. The creditors were able to issue out cheap credit with artificially low interest rates set by the central bank, which pushed up demand from consumers consumers, encouraging borrowing and spending. Capitalism isn't about playing God with the economy, therefore leaving interest rates be. If there is a higher interest rate, it's to disincentivise people from borrowing and spending to save more during those time periods. And so the problem with controlling interest rates is that, let's say during this time period where there's supposed to be a high interest rate, when you artificially lower the interest rate, all you're doing is raising consumer demand. In an area where there's a shortage of something, you create a greater cost. And of course the banks were getting away with issuing out the cheap credit, and therefore people were, taking this credit, first time buyers, especially in an area of a housing shortage, which created a very, very big problem in the inflationary problem resulting in the housing crash in the first place. It is also important to note that it's not the fault of capitalism for taking the risk away from the creditors through government protectionism, which created legally protected fraud. Through the socialist subsidies taxing the people of society to redistribute their wealth to socialise the losses of bad banks failing, this led to the poor economic business practice that resulted in incompetency, as the bad banks felt they could get away with anything, knowing they would never have to pay for their own losses. A capitalist system is not about rewarding failure and punishing success. It's about rewarding success and punishing failure. Therefore, in a capitalist system, the bad banks would have been left to liquidate, and their assets would have been bought over by more efficient competitors, and things would have continued on as normal. The taxpayer would not have paid a penny. The cause of the banking crisis wasn't as such to do with government regulation. It was to do with bad banks becoming too big to fail through the socialist government protectionism, failing to let failure fail. Also, in a capitalist system, creditors have the reality to face, where not only are they concerned about their return they make from the investment, but the risk involved. As there is no government protectionism to socialise the losses in a free market economy under capitalism, they are forced to pay for their own losses. It's for this reason that creditors will only lend to people they can trust, because at the end of the day they want to know they're going to be able to get a return from what they lend out to. However, once you take the risk away from creditors, and the creditors know that they can get away with all the losses that they are making, knowing fine well that the taxpayer is going to pay for all their losses and they're going to make a return, this legally protected fraud creates that incompetency, because they know they can get away with the fraud, they can get away with poor economic business practice as explained, because their losses are protected, they don't have any risk involved. And that's why the bad banks becoming too big to fail resulted in the banking crisis in the first place. Although Dr. Richard Wolff is correct in saying that the people were encouraged to borrow for what was not in hand and spend through credit, the lending is largely to blame on the central banks artificially lowering the interest rates, issuing out the cheap credit and getting away with legally protected fraud because of the socialist government protectionism. So on a final note, as pointed out in Thomas J. DiLorenzo's book How Capitalism Saved America, and as I mentioned before, between 1975 to 1991 the rich grew richer and the poor grew richer faster. So as Thomas J. DiLorenzo had touched upon, and we can see from the statistics here, only 5% of families in the bottom fifth of the income distribution in 1975 were still there in 1991. More than 3/4 of that had made their way up to the two highest income quintiles. The poorest families made the largest gains. Those who started in the bottom 20% in 1975 had an inflation-adjusted gain in annual income of $27,745 by 1991. Those who started in the top 20% in 1975 also improved, but only by $4,354. The rich are getting richer, the researchers concluded, but the poor are getting richer even faster. This was measured over 50,000 families, so this was a large research done over the course of a specific period between 1968 onwards, and of course over 50,000 families, and we saw these statistics. Again, less than 1% of the sampled population remained in the bottom 20% during the entire time period under study. Among the second poorest quintile in 1975, more than 70% had moved to a higher quintile by 1991, and 1/4 reached the 20% bracket. With the education and training, the rise up the income brackets can be very swift. More than half of the families who were at the bottom 20% in 1975 made it to a higher bracket within 4 years. Therefore, we can conclude that not only were the poor getting richer in society, this tells us that they did have money there to spend. Whilst he is right for pointing out about the issuing of credit for many people, the encouragement was created by government taking away the risk from the creditors.